Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. We're going to start in less than 1 minute, but you can go ahead and play with the annotations. You can place your a little heart where you're from so we can get to know each other. All right, let's wait a little bit more. We have more people coming in. So it's great. We have people from the west coast of Canada. It's nice. Okay. So we'll start right now in order to keep on the right time. So hello and welcome to all of you to today's webinar with Ocean Networks Canada. My name is Luisa Sarmiento and I will be your moderator today. We also have Tessa Owens that will monitor the chat and the Q&A at the end. Finally, we have Martin Scherwath, who will be our speaker today. So first, I want to introduce what this is all about, the Ocean Networks Canada Summer Webinar Series. So you will find out in a very brief moment that you're actually part of an entire series and that you can participate further. So the aim of this series is to offer free online interactive events featuring ocean-related topics. We will take you through scientific and indigenous approaches to understand ocean changes and their importance nowadays. So as you can see on the screen, there are plenty of events left. Make sure that you register to these events using the same registration link that you used for this event. So now let's see where you can put your questions today and get your answers. To you, Tessa.
All right, so today we're going to be using Slido, which is a Q&A feature. And so you can follow along with this throughout our presentation. You can do this on your phone or on a different tab on your computer. All you need to do is go to www.slido.com and enter our Q&A using the code #39922. If this is kind of too much for you to handle at the moment, feel free to put all of your questions into Zoom and we will make sure that they're transferred over into Slido. So we hope to be hearing from you there.
Thank you, Tessa. So we have a lot of participants. It's very nice to have all of you. So for those who have just came, just want to remind the team of the webinar, powerful earthquakes and tsunamis and how to tackle them. So now, without further ado, I'm really happy to introduce our speaker, Martin Scherwath. He is a senior staff scientist at Ocean Networks Canada, where he has worked since 2011. He has engaged scientists from all around the world to integrate cabled ocean observatory data into their research. Martin is a geophysicist by training and holds a master's degree from Leeds University in the UK. He also holds a PhD from Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand. In his research, he has worked on active Earth deformation processes from large tectonic processes, as well as gas hydrates and underwater mass movements. His favorite summer activity is hiking the remote and beautiful west coast of Vancouver Island. So now, Martin, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It's great to have you all attending, and it's a great honor to be able to speak to you. But first of all, I'd like us to acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and the Saanich peoples whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleagues, former colleagues, Tanya Lado-Inchua, current colleagues Angela Schlesinger, Taryn Moore, and Martin Hesemann, who contributed to this presentation. I know this is not about me, but just quickly, ever since I was a little child and when I started to go to school, I was really curious about how things work and initially wanted to look at the universe as a whole and looking at stars and planets, and then realized I'm too much of a hands-on person. I really like to, instead of doing astrophysics, do geophysics, get my hands dirty. And then I fell in love with the ocean, and so I finally ended up at Ocean Networks Canada. And today I'd like to give you a little brief history on plate tectonics to basically show you where earthquakes come from, talk a little bit about the West Coast, the Cascadia seismicity, all the earthquakes that we have, or the lack thereof, depending on how you want to see it. Also, how we actually monitor all these earthquakes, and then move over to tsunamis, which are a big, heavy consequence of large earthquakes, or can be. Some of the real-time instrumentation that we use to look, monitor tsunamis, and then what Ocean Networks Canada does in terms of tsunami modeling. And then finally, maybe most importantly, how to be prepared. And hopefully there's plenty of time for questions. And if you have any immediate ones, as you were told, you can put them down the chat, and hopefully I can find the time to answer them quickly, but keep them to the end if they are general questions. I'd like to start us off with a reminder that there is a story of the Thunderbird and the whale. So many generations ago, one dark, cold night, there was a big fight between the Thunderbird and the whale, and that caused the earth to shake. And then eventually the Thunderbird picked up the whale and dropped it off in the ocean. And so there was a huge wave generated that washed inland. And that story is told through the many generations by the indigenous people here, is really important for us to understand properly where we live. If we had heard or listened to that story from much earlier on, we would have known right away where we live here on the west coast of Canada or North America, where we actually do have big earthquakes and local tsunamis. Unfortunately, it took a little longer for us to realize that, and so now that we are aware of it, it's really helpful to build buildings and structures to withstand these big earthquakes and tsunamis. This earthquake actually happened on the 26th of January 1700. That led to the story of the Thunderbird and the whale around 9 p.m. in the evening here, local time. And we know that so well because there are records of this written down in the Japanese text records. And so they have a clear idea when the tsunami arrived, and modeling showed that it did actually happen on the 26th of January 1700. Okay, so where do these earthquakes come from? In order to understand that, here's a little history on plate tectonics. The Earth looked very different a long time ago and is constantly moving. And the history of plate tectonics basically started with people drawing the first maps of the globe. Here's one from 1570. We clearly line up the east coast of North America with the west coast of, or North and South, Central and South America with the west coast of Europe and Africa. They fit. And everyone looking at these maps immediately sees that. The big question was, why? Why are they matching, and were they once together? And there are written records from the 1700s and the first scientific presentation in 1912, but they were all dismissed as it's absolutely impossible to move a rock solid Earth so much that these continents could have been aligned. And so it took another half a century until more and more evidence basically showed us, yes, it is possible, because we now know that the Earth actually is only rock solid at the top, but deeper down, it's relatively viscous. And so things can move, can float. And we now know that there's ocean crust generated in the middle of some of our oceans. And these ocean crusts moved apart, can be pushed underneath continental crust, here as an example, North America. And we have volcanoes everywhere. So this is basically all the result that the Earth is actually pretty active and not rock solid. And for us, most important for the big earthquakes and subsequent tsunamis are these zones where the oceanic plate goes underneath the continental plate. And it doesn't do so continuously, but gets locked. And then once in a while, the energy gets released through a big earthquake. So these so-called tectonic shifts create shaking, and mostly in the form of earthquakes. So before we look into more details on earthquakes, let's move over to Louisa for another exercise for the audience.
So we will have a very short exercise. You can go ahead. Yes, thank you. To see, have you ever felt an earthquake? So you can go ahead and use the zoom annotations and the heart and place the city, the country, or maybe at sea where you felt an earthquake. So you will see on the top the viewing screen. So it's a it's a it's a green square, and you can click on view options and annotate. If you have any questions about how to do this, please go ahead and put them in the chat. So right now we have someone that has felt an earthquake on the West Coast. Oh, I see. Okay, people are putting also arrows. So Martin, what do you think of that?
Oh, as they're coming in, it looks pretty interesting. It we definitely have a lot of hearts and pointers here at our West Coast. Maybe it's because where the audience is, but I now see hearts appearing also over in on the other side of the Pacific in Taiwan. There's also something in Israel and very many other places now. Oh, that's fantastic, coming along. So there are a lot of people who actually felt an earthquake. That's really good to know. So oh, Santiago. Yeah, we're basically covering the whole globe here, which is
Yeah, very
absolutely
interesting.
fantastic. Thank you.
Great. So now let's see in the next slide what happens.
So if I compare where you felt earthquakes with the last month's big shakes, um, the maps don't quite line up, but you can basically get the gist that wherever you felt earthquakes, these are probably all supposed to be here. There actually have been earthquakes in the last month. And just to point out a couple, maybe read it in the newspaper today or read it online yesterday, there was a big earthquake here in Mexico, magnitude 7.4, which was unfortunately fatal for some. We also had a big same magnitude over here in Kermadec, where not so many people lived and so not so much damage either, and a couple of others all around here. And this is just 1 month of earthquakes of magnitude 4.5 and bigger, so it's constantly active. If I would have given that presentation yesterday, there would have been another spot here, because yesterday, a month ago, there was a magnitude 5.2 of Tofino. So very local to Vancouver Island and us, and maybe some of you have felt that one too. Now, what do all these earthquake magnitudes really mean? People talk about magnitudes, and and here's a scale, a graph basically that puts magnitudes in relation to how often they occur and how much energy is released. So what you can see here is the scale for magnitude goes all the way up to 10, although a magnitude 10 is extremely unlikely and probably will never ever happen. But this is a size that was basically kept in mind when earthquake magnitudes were defined, that earthquake should be a number between 0 and 9. Our instruments have become much more sensitive now, so we can detect magnitudes less than 0, really tiny energy releases. And what we can see here is that in any given year, there are about 1 million magnitudes 2, or less than 1 of these really large magnitude 9 and above earthquakes. And in terms of energy release, between one magnitude and the other, there is about 30 times more energy released, or between 2 magnitudes, 1,000 times more energy released. So if you basically compare a magnitude 7.4, which we had in Mexico yesterday, to the big magnitude 9, 9.5 ones, the biggest one we had on this planet, there's actually another 1,000 times more energy released in these really big earthquakes. And just as an example, where energy release compares to earthquakes, the Hiroshima bomb would be here around magnitude 6. And the biggest earthquake ever, which was the 1960 event in Chile was magnitude 9.5, 9.4 to 9.6, depending on whose research you take into account. Okay, let's look at how earthquakes propagate. So this is basically if you have an earthquake somewhere in the subsurface, the release of energy that has been stored and stress release, basically, you have signals propagating through the earth and arriving as we record them here on seismic stations on the surface. And the way these energies propagate, there are actually two or several ways. And the two most important ones are the primary compressional waves that basically have particle motion back and forth in the direction of propagation, and the secondary waves, shear waves, they travel slower, about 60% of the speed of the P waves. They have sideways motion and are not quite as efficient. And so these are the two most important earthquake signals because they tell us, as they travel at different speeds, how far away the earthquake was. And this is a so-called seismogram, an earthquake recording that basically shows background noise until the first arrival of the P wave, and then the second arrival of the S wave. And as I said, the time between tells us how far the earthquake was. And it's a bit similar to thunder and lightning, where if you see a flash and you count seconds until you hear the thunder, you know roughly how far away that, that lightning was. And it's similar with the P wave, which sometimes we hear, only sometimes we don't. It's our instruments that tell there was a P wave. And then we have these S waves that are bigger in intensity and come and shake us and maybe even cause some damage. Okay, now let's move over to the west coast of North America, the so-called Cascadia margin, and look at the seismicity, the earthquake activity here. So in this sketch here, you can see some symbols drawn, which are representing the three kinds of earthquakes that we are expecting here. The first one is the so-called subduction zone megathrust earthquake, where a very large section of crust is currently locked, and it will be releasing a lot of energy one time, sooner or later. Another type is further down, some local deformation in the downgoing continental plate here, or oceanic plate actually, that are relatively deep. And then on the top, in the top, we have these shallow crustal earthquakes. They can be also extremely damaging when they are big, and they're right on top, right at places where we live. So this big one will shake the entire margin, and these small ones will shake regionally. And the question is always which one is more important. Maybe we can talk about that a little later. But first of all, let's look into the details of the first type, the subduction zone megathrust earthquake. And this is a plot here of the entire so-called Cascadia margin, all the way from Northern California to offshore Vancouver Island. And in red here is the potentially locked zone that can release energy at any moment. And in yellow here are the locations where Chris Goldfinger and colleagues have taken some sediment cores offshore and found disturbances. And these disturbances are associated to earthquakes when a lot of the sediment cores show them sort of on a more regional, margin-wide scale. And we can also date them. So that's how we know that in the south, there have been somewhat more large earthquakes disturbing the seafloor, maybe coming roughly every 200 years. And the further north we go, the slightly more rare these big disturbances have been. And offshore Vancouver Island, the time between these big earthquakes on average was about 500 years. That doesn't mean we have an earthquake every 500 years. That just means that's the average return time. And the closest records of these two disturbances were between 110 years apart. And the longest time between those two earthquakes, the so-called megathrust earthquakes, was over 1,000 years. So the fact that it was 320 and a half years ago that we had the last one, some people say, oh, we are overdue. Some people say, oh, well, it could be another 700 years. Of course it could be, but it could be any moment now. And we basically need to accept that they will happen, and we just don't know when. Okay, the next type of earthquakes that we have here are the deep subduction earthquakes that are down here. And here's an example from 2015, very local to Victoria, here on the west coast of North America. And maybe some of you felt that. It was 20 to midnight local time, just before New Year. And it was a magnitude 4.7. And on the map, it's really close. It's only 20 kilometers from Victoria. So the epicenter here drawn on the surface is it's quite close. But because the earthquake was so deep, it was about 60 kilometers at depth, the hypocenter was actually over 60 or 64 kilometers away from Victoria. And still, I felt it. I actually more heard it. I was lying in bed at the time and heard the walls cracking. And it was fascinating to be reminded yet again, we live in a very active part of the world here in terms of earthquakes. And the final type of earthquake are the shallow crustal earthquakes that we have here more near the surface. And as example, here again focused on Victoria, is there are lots of faults mapped that may or may not be active. And here's one fault called the Reach River Fault that was long thought maybe not being an active fault, but recent digging and looking at records basically showed that it's probably still active. And if the entire fault ruptures, we may expect as big as an earthquake of magnitude 7. And that is really close, right south of downtown Victoria, and then going through these communities here. And it's something to be aware of, that a magnitude 7 earthquake can cause some serious local damage. So how do we know about all these earthquakes? Is basically we have a lot of monitoring going on, and in Canada, you can see the stations here are distributed all around. And so with that, we have a pretty good understanding of what's happening. Here's Vancouver Island also has a lot of stations to measure the seismicity we have. And if we overlay quickly where these earthquakes that have been recorded since track record 1627, they fall exactly in the area of where we now have the stations, and vice versa, rather. The stations were put in place where we have a lot of earthquakes. So we pretty much know very well what's going on. Ocean Networks Canada has this cabled observatory here with seismic sensors now permanently and live recording earthquake activity all the way out here off the coast of Vancouver Island. But we also have some stations now on land that we maintain for an earthquake early warning system that is currently in the commissioning phase. And I will come back to that a little later. So some take-home messages for earthquakes. Our last big one was in January 1700. And there's this great story of the Thunderbird and the whale, basically telling us this is happening and this will happen again. These earthquakes are because our plates that we live on are actually moving. The Earth is not rock solid. It's quite active, quite dynamic. And so the stress that is built up when tectonic plates want to move is released through earthquakes. And then the earthquakes generate a lot of waves. And the first one to arrive usually is the P wave, and the second one, the S wave. And the difference tells us how far the earthquake was from us. And our history of big earthquake records shows us that in the north here of the Cascadia margin, we have to expect big ones roughly every 500 years, but they can be as short as 100 or as long as 1,000 years in between these two events. And then finally, we have a lot of earthquake monitoring going on in Canada and also on Vancouver Island. And also, what we need to be aware of that the very big earthquakes, the megathrust earthquakes, subduction zone earthquakes, can also generate a tsunami. So I'd like to go over to the tsunami story now. And as you can see here in this illustration, when the plate is actually moving during an earthquake, you see a big trough here. So when it comes to tsunamis, it's important to know that this is not necessarily a big wave traveling at you. It could also be a trough that then soon be followed by a big wave. Okay, let's look at tsunamis. And so what is not a tsunami are these normal ocean waves. So what we can see here is this constantly rolling ocean wave activity that can be quite big, and people can have a lot of fun playing with these waves when they go out and surf. And the beauty of these waves is they basically just transfer energy, and they're rolling and hit the shore, and then they just run out on the beach. So we don't really have to expect too big serious damages. I mean, if you get caught in one, yeah, that can hurt, but locally, usually the activity stays out there. Now, if we compare that with a tsunami wave, so this is a record of the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and subsequent tsunami. You can see these waves rolling on. So the wave height might be very similar, but actually instead of this being a circular sort of ocean motion, these waves carry a lot of volume, and it's like a wall of water, and that washes inland. And when these water masses hit land and it's shallow, they take anything in its way, and they can be extremely powerful, and especially the very large tsunamis from the very large earthquakes, um, they have a lot of potential for serious destruction. So the most important thing is to know that these occur and how big they can be in order to be prepared. Okay, now over to Luisa for some more questions for the audience.
Thank you, Martin, for these lovely videos. Very interesting. So now we want to know, what do you think are some key features of a tsunami? So you should see a poll appearing in your screen, and you can go ahead and guess what you think. So always caused by an earthquake, travel as fast as a jet plane, advances slowly, a single big wave, easy to predict, only worrisome in earthquake zones. So I see people are coming and answering. Very interesting answers. Wow, a lot of participation. Great. So we are going to wait a little bit more because we have now 42 participants. Oh, I see there's some dominant answers. Very interesting. Okay, so Martin, maybe you can go ahead and start commenting on these answers.
Oh, wow. Excellent. Now I see the results as well. Thank you for sharing, and thanks everyone for participating. And this was obviously multiple choice, so you could have given various answers. And always caused by an earthquake? Actually, that's not quite true, because we have 6 other causes of tsunamis that could be also triggered by a landslide, which actually can be triggered by an earthquake itself. So maybe you're thinking of indirect earthquake tsunami triggers. So about 80% of the tsunamis are generated by earthquakes. As fast as a jet plane, that's actually true. When they travel in the deep ocean, they can be really fast, but they can also, or they will also slow down when they come to shore. And to outrun them, you have to be an Olympic athlete, and in order to outrun them. So some of you might have thought more about, yes, if you get the warning, then there is a chance to get away from them. And that is also true. Then you don't actually need to outrun them. You can just outwalk them or drive away from them if you have enough warning. A single big wave, again, not quite true, because they're usually a series of waves, but certainly big. Easy to predict. That's hopefully where we're getting to, and there is some research towards predicting them. but definitely not easy. And only worrisome in earthquake zones, not necessarily only, but definitely to be aware of in earthquake zones that big earthquakes can cause big tsunamis and small ones can cause small tsunamis. And it's good to know them. So thank you for that. Okay, let's look at the most typical tsunami generated by an earthquake. So this is an illustration from Washington Post that shows nicely that if we have an earthquake and we have seafloor displacement, it actually moves a body of water up or down, up probably in one direction, down the other, and that is causing a tsunami wave, a big displacement of water wave. And then when they travel in the deep ocean, let's, for example, say at 4 kilometers water depth, they travel at a speed of 713 kilometers an hour. That is definitely the speed of a jet plane, and the deeper the ocean, the faster it travels. They also have very long wavelengths, so it means the peaks of two wave heights are hundreds of kilometers apart. And if you're sitting out on a boat, these wave peaks can come at you maybe an hour apart. So for half an hour, your boat goes up, and for another half an hour, it goes down. You actually don't notice these massive waves if you're out in the deep ocean. However, when the ocean waters become shallower and shallower, the waves slow down and they become higher. So as an example of 50 meters water depth, the wave only travels at 80 kilometers an hour, still very fast, but not the jet plane speed anymore. And the wavelength becomes much narrower, and that's how they're rising in size. So at an example, 10 meters water depth, they have the speed of an Olympic athlete running 100 meters in 10 seconds. So that's tough one to keep going at, but it's almost reaching the human's maximum speed range. And these walls of water, depending on where they start, become higher and higher. So that's how they propagate through the ocean. And how do we measure them? It's actually more, where do we measure them? So we can have, as you can see here, we have a distribution of sensors, and on ocean networks we use the bottom pressure recorders, as well as conductivity, temperature, depth sensors that sample often enough that basically show us these long wavelength pressure waves traveling across our network. And there are also some independent buoys called the DART buoys that also give us some real-time data whenever they see something coming. Usually they record an earthquake and then they get switched on. They send data to our tsunami early warning centers. And so that's how we know that big tsunami waves are coming, or tsunami waves in general are coming. And then if they are big, we definitely need to start issuing a warning. And Ocean Networks Canada has also been busy in tsunami modeling. So just a quick run through what does modeling entail. So to model a tsunami, as an example here, our West Coast region, the tsunami that will be triggered by the big earthquake. For that, we need a so-called earthquake model. How much ocean is moving at what speed and what height. And that basically pushes water masses around. And then the bathymetry will tell how fast the waves is coming, or the waves are coming to shore. And then we also need the topography, so the land heights, not just the water depth, but land heights, to know how far they inundate. And then with these input parameters, we do some computer modeling and eventually come up with the predicted wave heights from this model, how far inland these tsunami waves travel, the inundation, how fast they come, what are the maximum currents to expect, how long it would take for these waves to arrive, and how long would actually this event go on for. And this could be in a very large tsunami setting, this could be a day or even longer. So it could be really long. And this is just an example how it then looks like on a map for Port Alberni, which has been hit by tsunamis in the past and will be hit again. This model basically shows what to expect for the city of Port Alberni here on Vancouver Island. And examples from Victoria here at the southern tip of Vancouver Island. In terms of water level, how high are the waves? And so the highest waves when it comes to Victoria itself is about 3.5 meters high, right here where our Navy has its Navy base. So they're definitely not in the perfect spot when it comes to tsunamis, but hopefully they have enough time to do something, get the ships out of harm's way. Or here, what we call the gorge in Victoria, there is also some relatively high waves, just because of the focusing effect when the land narrows and the wave basically gets pushed up. But also really important are how fast does the tsunami travel. And here, when it comes to the wave entering the inner harbor, the speeds can be 3 meters per second, which is really fast. So all the boaters out here, they need to either tie their boats down really, really well, or had enough warning to get them out of harm's way and go into regions where the wave is not quite so fast. Will there be enough time? Well, the modeling shows that Victoria will have over an hour of warning. When we have a local earthquake here offshore, the waves will actually travel, even though they're coming in fast, will take their time and travel for an hour or maybe even an hour and a half to reach us. And then this model also gives us the so-called inundation line here again for Victoria. And maybe take a moment to locate yourself. The yellow line basically shows that everything outside this area here will be affected by a tsunami, and everything inside will most likely not. And there are only a few areas, like if you're coming around here, the inner harbor, up the gorge, the wave actually will wash inland here, at least in this model. And so there are some residential areas that definitely need to be evacuated, but a lot of us around in these regions would be safe from the tsunami. So some take-home messages for tsunamis. There are a series of waves, not just a single wave, and they can be going on for many hours. There's time between the waves, and that can be hours apart. So if you see the wave going away, it's not necessarily safe then to go back home. Better wait until the authorities tell you it is time to go home. The first wave may not be the highest, and it can be even the trough that arrives first. So hang in there until authorities tell you it's safe to go. As I just mentioned, the ocean can retrieve suddenly, so it's definitely time when you see the ocean go away to search for high ground if you're near the shore. And don't forget about the tsunami currents. The 2011 tsunami wasn't such a big wave here on the West Coast, but it did cause a fatality by someone who wanted to see it coming and then washed away because they were so fast. So the most important take-home message maybe from this is, yes, be prepared. So the last part of the talk, I would like to talk about this preparation. And here's a video of two guys in Japan doing their normal activities and then experiencing an earthquake. And so you see that they're just doing their normal thing, and then suddenly they both seem to be looking somewhere. And this may be because they heard an earthquake, but what they definitely feel is the S wave shaking them around. And so this is can be quite unsettling. And so that's why it's really good to be prepared and know what to do. So back to Louisa for another Zoom poll.
So quickly, before we go to the last part of the talk, we want to know, how do you we want to know, do you feel prepared to stay safe during an earthquake? Do you know how to prepare your home for an earthquake? And lastly, is your home at this very moment prepared for an earthquake? So yes, no, kind of? Great. Lots of people participating. Let's wait. a bit more. And yes, so Martin, tell us about these answers. What do you think?
I don't see the answers, unfortunately. Oh,
Do
here
you see
they
them now?
are.
Good.
Awesome. I see yeses. That is fantastic. Do you feel safe? A lot of people feel kind of safe, which is how definitely I associate. I know what they are, and I always hope things will be fine. But do I feel safe? Maybe the earthquake will tell. And some knows. That's interesting. Yes, it's definitely unsettling to be in an earthquake, but to feel safe is best way is to be prepared. So do you actually know how to prepare your home? Again, fantastic. Some people know, some people kind of know, and there are some people who don't yet know how to prepare their home. Maybe they don't live in an earthquake zone, so there's actually nothing for them to do. But if there is, they better know what to do. And then have you actually prepared? This is quite telling. So a lot of people know how to prepare their home, but like me, haven't gone through every single shelf yet and secured it and nailed it to the wall to prepare their books to not fall out during an earthquake. And there's lots of things that can be done, but we actually also have to then do it. Thank you for that. This is fantastic. There was a similar poll 7 years ago in the city of Vancouver, and actually 2/3 of the people didn't know the best way to stay safe during an earthquake, and 3/4 didn't know how to prepare their home. So there's definitely more to learn, and the best place to go is to find out from local authorities what tips they have, because they know the region where you live, and they have a lot of very great tips. And here's just one: what do I do if I'm in bed? And yes, best stay there. Maybe use the pillow to cover your head, just in case something accidentally that you haven't secured yet might fall onto you. Maybe turn onto your stomach so you save your vital organs, things like that. And have a good pair of steady shoes in case there's broken glass once the earthquake is over and you want to move around and you're barefoot in bed, which usually a lot of people are. It's good to have some shoes nearby and so you can safely keep walking. There's also a good way of exercising this, how to prepare for an earthquake, and what to do during an earthquake, and that's called Shakeout. Every third Thursday in October, there's a Shakeout event where people basically just go through the exercise of drop, cover, and hold on for a minute. It's very quick, and it basically gets you into the habit of what to do during an earthquake. And 60 seconds is usually the way, the duration that you should stay on the ground and hold on until after the earthquake stops, just in case there's more to come. But not everyone has a table nearby, and as I said, maybe you're in bed, maybe you're outside, maybe you're driving a car, maybe you have a wheelchair. There are lots of other ways of knowing what to do during an earthquake. It's always good to check in with the local authorities to get some of these guidances. In terms of earthquake mitigation, also now we know what earthquakes to expect in this region. We could build buildings that can withstand these, or old buildings can be retrofitted or if need be rebuilt. But we also have some non-structural mitigation. So we can have a warning system, a security system. We can get insurance for our house, and very important is to be prepared. In terms of earthquake early warning, we are currently in the process of commissioning an earthquake early warning system that would basically provide us with some warning. So if we have sensors detecting an earthquake, especially the first felt wave, which is the P wave, it could issue a warning that there could be damaging earthquakes following. And if we have the sensors right where the earthquake is, we could then issue or get a warning out to where people live early enough. So these sensors have been installed since 2016, and you've seen this map here below before. This is where they are. So we do have a lot of sensors that hopefully detect the primary waves, the P waves, and give a warning, or can be used for a warning for people who live here. And just as an example, people in Vancouver may get up to 36 seconds of warning in order to do something. 30 seconds might not sound as much, but maybe there is. Here's a 10-second animation of what you can do in just 10 seconds. Doctors can stop surgery. You can also all the way down to recall an elevator in only 8 seconds, so people don't get stuck in elevators anymore. And what about tsunamis? Maybe some of you remember at the beginning of 2018, there was an actual tsunami warning from a very big earthquake off Alaska. Luckily, or maybe not, I was in, I would have liked to be part of that exercise. I was in Germany at the time, and for me it was daytime, but it was nighttime here. And a few people living close to the coast were actually woken up and told to leave their homes because this size earthquake can trigger a tsunami. It did actually trigger a tsunami too, but not a very big one, luckily. It turned out our recorders on our tsunami detection system basically showed it was only a few centimeters in the deep ocean and close to shore, maybe up to 10 centimeters high. So not a very big wave, and certainly in hindsight, no need to evacuate, but maybe the local authorities thought better safe than sorry. And in terms of tsunami mitigation, again, we can do some structural mitigations by building tsunami walls. Japan has been very good in building tsunami walls. Unfortunately, they underestimated the size of the tsunami in 2011. And so these walls were not high enough in hindsight. You can also build vertical evacuation centers in case you don't live near a high hill that you can climb, in case you live near the coast and need to get out of harm's way. There's no place to go. Someone can build an evacuation center or just go to high levels in the building. And the non-structural mitigation methods are, again, to be prepared and know what to do, and ideally also have a warning system, which is something not every country can afford, but it's quite important to have. So be prepared and not scared. It's good to know the risk. Know where you live and where you work and where you play, basically where you spend your time, and know what to expect, especially the soil on which the buildings stand. Will you have experience more shaking or maybe less than other places? It's always good to make a plan. So secure your furniture, think about insurance, and also maybe think about where to shelter and where to put supplies in case there won't be shops open for a while. Discuss with your loved ones where you would meet in case you're apart, like working during the day at other places than home, as we do right now. And also practice, which is always good. And then maybe get a kit that will keep you afloat for a week or so until things start to normalize gradually. And know your neighbors. If you have a nurse next door, it's good to know that she is a nurse in case you have an injury at home also. And in order to find out more, like for example, again in Victoria, what kind of ground is your place of work or your home? You can go to the local government pages and get all that information. If you search earthquake hazard map, you find results really quickly, and same for tsunamis for BC. So there's a lot of information out there, and basically it's a good advice to be aware of what's coming. I'm going the wrong way. I just wanted to bring up the final summary slide and basically show how important it is to be prepared and don't claim to be not aware. Okay, thank you, everyone. And I also like to acknowledge the government of British Columbia and the federal government of Canada for financing the Earthquake Early Warning project. And special thanks to our colleagues at Natural Resources Canada and our industry partners for this fantastic project.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this very interesting talk. And I'm certainly feel ready for to uptake an earthquake. You can see on the screen our contact information, so you can go ahead and write it down, but we will put it after the Q&A. So without further ado, Tessa, present the Q&A, please.
All right, so there's been some great questions coming in through Slido. I'm going to start screen sharing. So if you'd like to vote on any of these questions or submit questions, please just join us at slido.com and enter with the code 39922. But I'm going to start reading these out for Martin. So at the top, we have this question: are there any parts of the world where seismic monitoring is lacking?
Oh, fantastic question. Seismic monitoring is definitely something that needs to happen everywhere where we have earthquakes. And because it costs money, there are some countries that are not well equipped with earthquake monitoring, and they usually get some help from other countries. But there are some areas that are definitely under monitored. And actually an important part that is certainly regularly under monitored is the offshore region, where we have stations relatively far apart and can only afford a very dense network of seismic monitoring stations for a short period of time to find out what smaller kinds of earthquakes there are. And so a general answer is there can be more, and some places are very challenging, and the offshore is unfortunately very expensive to keep constantly monitoring.
Great, thank you. I hope that answers your question. I'm just going to stop screen sharing here so we can watch Dr. Martin as he's answering these questions. And the first question that we have now at the top is, you mentioned we expect a big earthquake on Canada's west coast every 500 years on average. Has the time between the big earthquakes increased?
Oh, good question too. Actually, I'm not aware of that, and I would not expect the time to increase. Right now, we know that this is a very active zone. There's lots of active deformation, and we will expect an earthquake again at any time. And so as long as this margin is active, which will probably be going on for millions of years, there will be these big earthquakes, and they seem to have come sometimes more often, sometimes less often. The question is always what triggers it, and there's some research into predicting these. Are there foreshocks that tell us when the next one is coming, or other clues? And there's nothing at the moment that we can use to give us even a day's or a week or so of warning. Nothing. We just have to expect that these earthquakes can be any time. And even if the last one was only 320 years ago, doesn't mean to be safe for another 700 years. Maybe, but maybe not.
Great. So that's why we need these early warning systems.
Right.
Perfect. Another question is, are both P and S waves potentially destructive? How do they differ with respect to damage?
Yes, the P wave is a so-called compressional waves, and then when it moves up, say it comes from below, it moves up and down until it hits buildings, say, it usually just shakes it up and down a little, and most structures are relatively safe with that. The S waves, when they come up from depth, are going sideways, and when they hit our house, say, it's shaking it back and forth sideways, and that's why the S wave is typically the damaging one. And so we can use the P wave to know that there's more to come and potentially damaging one. And then afterwards, they even come yet another set of waves, the surface waves, that can also be damaging, but not necessarily. So the S wave is the one to look out for.
Great question and great answer. Next we have, do you know the warning time for tsunamis in Port Alberni? Very geographically specific.
Yes, I think, I don't know it off by heart, and I didn't look it up. So I would expect it to be in the order of several tens of minutes. So not like the hour we have here in Victoria. But that's not very much warning, and you will definitely have felt the earthquake. So just don't wait for the warning. If you feel a big earthquake, there's some kind of rule which I call the rule of 15. If you feel the ground shaking for more than 15 seconds, you know it's going to be a big earthquake. And that means you have 15 minutes to get away to high ground if you live in a zone that can be hit by a tsunami, and try to get to high ground 15 meters high above the water. So in Port Alberni, when you feel that earthquake and you're living in that zone of that can be inundated by a tsunami, it's time to go as soon as it is safe after the earthquake, time to go out into the high ground.
That's a great, really practical takeaway here. So 15, 15, 15, if the ground is shaking for 15 seconds, you have 15 minutes to run away. You should be 15 meters or something like that above sea level. Great. Next question. Is it easy to find out how earthquake safe the construction of your home is, or what your property's soil type is?
It is easy where that information exists. Like for Victoria, you can just look it up, download that map yourself and zoom in and identify your street. Usually the building code is taking that into account as well, or it should be at least. So depending on when your building was built, it should be then safe from what we now know. But if in order to verify that, better check it out for yourself and just go through that exercise. Type in earthquake hazard map on the Victoria or on the BC government page and check out Victoria.
It's great. Those are freely available. Next question. Do tsunamis cause a great deal of damage to ocean life as well?
Very good question. Probably depends where you are. I mean, ocean life is pretty resistant and most of it lives on the ocean floor. So the tsunamis are just a pressure wave traveling above, so they might not even notice it. When they live really close to shore, for example, we have at Folger Pinnacle some instruments on a piece of rock that's only 20 meters deep. If a tsunami rolls over it, it might even be the trough will expose that piece of rock, and then the wave that comes following will potentially rip that life that's on there away. So it can be damaging, probably closer to the coast where you have life.
Great. So we just have 2 minutes left here. So I think this will be the final question. We have this question submitted. We read articles about the prediction of earthquakes in the range of 4 to 5 days. Does ONC have current work on that order of predictions?
Sorry, can you read that again? 3 to 5 days?
Sure.
Oh.
In the range of 4 to 5 days. So I guess there are articles about predicting earthquakes as far out from the event as 4 to 5 days. And does ONC currently work on that scale of prediction?
No, ONC does not work on that scale of prediction, and that is something that, I mean, I'd love to see. There is some evidence that, for example, you can take a piece of rock and break it in the lab, and there is an electric field generated from that, and you can see just before the break that there are some changes to the electric field that some people try to monitor and make predictions because of that. That is something that has not been applied successfully yet to have an entire margin or so equipped with enough electric field measurements or electromagnetic measurement stations to actually see if that signal is there. So it's hopefully something in the future, and there's evidence for that. And some animals, for example, have been reacting strangely before an earthquake. Not, I think, 4 to 5 days, but maybe hours before. So there's probably something that we don't quite use yet. But it's a great question. I'm often hoping that we can do better in the future.
Absolutely. So there are still a few questions left we won't have time to get to today. I encourage you to reach out to us on social media. You can find our Twitter account or our Instagram, and if you DM the social media team there with your questions, I'm sure they can forward the questions to Dr. Scherwath, who can get back to you. So that's all from me. Louisa, did you want to wrap up?
No, just to remind to all of the audience members, if you can take 3 minutes to complete our satisfaction survey, it will help us improve the upcoming webinars. And thank you, Martin, for this great presentation. Thank you, Tessa, for the Q&A. And thank you, all of you, for watching from all around the world, from all around Canada. And hope to see you in the upcoming weeks. So stay tuned in our social medias. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.